On August 12th, my long and busy summer had come to an end, and I was on a long road trip from my parents' home in Alabama back here to West Point. I planned to stop at a friend's place near the University of Virginia. And as the day wore on, the news was filled with reports of riots near the school. Late in the afternoon, a white supremacist rally turned fatal when a domestic terrorist drove his vehicle through a crowd of protesters. 2 police officers also lost their lives when the police helicopter that was observing the violence crashed. These senseless tragedies brought forth the issues of political polarization and division within our nation to the forefront of the national conversation. Over the last several decades, America has experienced an increase in political polarization as well as a decrease in a unified sense of community. This is evident not only through the events in Charlottesville, but also through the increased tensions between people of different political affiliations and backgrounds. Pew Research recently concluded a study that surveyed the American public in 1994, 2004, and 2014. This study supports the theory that America is only becoming more and more politically polarized. One metric that Pew used to demonstrate political polarization were the attitudes toward the opposing political party. The percentage of Democrats who had a severely unfavorable opinion of Republicans has steadily increased by about 1% per year. Pew refers to this metric as antipathy. Democratic antipathy towards Republicans has increased from 16% in 1994 all the way to 38% in 2014. And Republican attitudes toward Democrats have done similarly. Another metric that Pew used were ideological curves of each political party. As you can see here, over the 20 years of the study, these 2 ideological curves have grown further and further apart, leaving a widening gap in the middle. This gap is the division that exists within America today. The division grew so intense that Pew decided to add another question to their survey in 2014. The question was, do you think the opposing party poses a threat to the national interest? 27% of Democrats and 36% of Republicans said yes. This really puts political polarization into perspective. Over a quarter of each political party views the opposition as an outright threat to the interest of the nation. Now, if we're currently in the most polarized time in history, you're probably wondering when the least polarized time was. Now, political polarization throughout the entirety of American history is hard to measure, simply because we don't have survey data going back that far. What we do have are the voting records of the House and the Senate. And based upon these records, we can make a hypothesis about what the political polarization of America was at that time. As you can see here, America experienced a gradual decrease in political polarization beginning right around the time of the beginning of World War II, and this decrease lasted all the way up until the late 1930s. It stayed pretty steady until the late 1960s and then began to experience another increase. Now, it's difficult to isolate which factors led to this decrease in political polarization. However, a few inferences can be made simply based upon the time frame. After experiencing two world wars and the start of the Great Depression, America had shared hardships and experiences and a common goal, which was to rebuild and prosper in the face of these devastating events. It's reasonable to think that these factors had an effect on the decrease in political polarization. Early on, I realized that the racial tensions and political polarization that the rest of the country experienced aren't typically things that we experience in the military. I come from an extremely rural, white, conservative background with very little experience in dealing with people who are different. And I'm ashamed to say that I had many horrible prejudices and biases against people who were different from me before I joined the Army. When I imagine the far right of today, I imagine myself before joining the Army, and I imagine the community from which I came. But I joined the Army at 17, and I quickly realized how wrong those ideas were. Working with people from different backgrounds, my prejudices and biases against those people were quickly proved to be wrong. We were united behind shared hardships and experiences and a common goal. Through this, my personal political polarization was decreased, and it shaped my worldview today. This effect isn't partisan. The same can be said from people from far left backgrounds. When I was enlisted, I worked with a young soldier from Southern California who was from a Hispanic community just as insular as my own. His family had very left-leaning views, and he had a very narrow view of what it meant to be a white conservative. In his mind, all white conservatives were hate-filled and racist. After being in the Army, he quickly realized that that just wasn't true. Working with white conservatives, he realized that they were compassionate, caring people with whom he had things in common with, but they just disagreed on fundamental political issues. So early on in my cadet career, I began to think critically about the problem of political polarization. I knew the experience that I had in the Army, and I knew why that led to a decrease in my own political polarization. I also had a working theory about why military service members are typically less polarized than the general public, and I had a good idea of why America was more moderate during certain periods of history. Only two questions remained. The first being, could these factors be replicated on a national level outside of the military, especially given our current political environment? The second question was, would these factors have the same effect on a demographic larger than the military? So, as any curious mind would, I began to research and brainstorm. I realized that not only could these factors be replicated, they already existed outside of the military. National service programs, such as Peace Corps, Teach for America, and AmeriCorps, provided civilian replications of these specific factors. They brought people from different backgrounds together, and through shared experience and hardships, united them behind a single, unified cause. Knowing this, one question still remained. Would these factors have the same effect on others as it does on the military? That's a difficult question to answer. Theoretically, it should. If you bring people from diverse backgrounds together, you expose them to one another, and you have them work together, they get to know each other on a personal level and can no longer vilify one another. They realize that their preconceived notions, prejudices, and biases just aren't true. And through that experience, they should become less politically polarized. This is even more important today when so many people live in isolated communities with little diversity and are constantly bombarded with messages and images that fit within their narrow political ideology. National service programs may be one of the few times that these people are brought out of their echo chamber. In February of 2017, I served as a delegate to the National Campaign for Civic and Political Engagement, which was intended to serve as a year-long bipartisan working conference focused on reuniting the country after the after the divisive election of 2016. Through this experience, I worked with students from diverse racial, geographic, political, and economic backgrounds to brainstorm initiatives to bridge the gap and reunite the country. My ideas on national service were further reinforced by a close mentor of mine, former Army officer Joe Goodwin, who organized this conference at Harvard. As I began to share my ideas on national service with my fellow delegates, and Joe lended his authority to give us more legitimacy, my group began to form a plan to bolster national service programs. Current national service programs are funded under the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act, a largely Democrat bill. Now, This bill is discretionary spending, so it must go through the appropriations process at least once a year. In the 2018 appropriations process, these programs were in grave danger in the face of budget cuts. Given this, my group and I decided that the best way to expand available national service opportunities and secure funding over the long term was to rebrand the Serve America Act to be more bipartisan. After some discussion, we decided that the most effective way to do this would be to reintroduce the bill, including the current provisions, as well as provisions for an infrastructure repair program and associated skilled labor training and apprenticeships. This initiative was intended to, 1, expand available national service opportunities, 2, make the bill more bipartisan by including Republican priorities such as infrastructure repair and job creation, and 3, issue a call to national service in order to decrease overall political polarization. Ideally, we favored compulsory national service, but given the current political environment, we decided that this was the best method. We're currently getting into the specifics of the legislation, some of which I'll go over with you now. As I said, there will be an infrastructure repair program and associated skilled labor and training apprenticeships. But in addition to this, we plan to put offices in insulated communities, be that rural or urban, in order to bring those diverse populations together and have them work outside of their echo chamber. We're currently talking about the specifics of this legislation and drafting it and meeting with policymakers to make progress on this plan. National service is an important aspect of American life. Throughout American history, the most unified times have been from the beginning of World War I all the way up until the late 1960s. During this time, Americans had shared experiences and hardships and a unified identity as Americans. These factors can be replicated today. We can unite not only to rebuild the failing infrastructure of America, but also to build an inclusive national identity in which our relationships with our neighbors are no longer defined by our narrow political ideology, but are instead characterized by the quality of ourselves. With a call to national service focused on infrastructure repair, we can unite the diverse population of America behind this national cause and thereby decrease political polarization. As a nation, we're currently divided, but with a future of strong national service, we can once again truly be the United States of America. Thank you.